Hey kids, Dr. T here. Alright, in this video we're going to tackle the half angle identities. You did the double angle, so it's 2 times some angle. Now guess what? It's going to be half of an angle. So, let's get started. Okay, now if you look to the right of your screen, it's got all the half angle formulas. We're not going to prove them. We're just going to take them on faith. And you trust Dr. Tozer that those are actually identities. They're true. The left side is always equal to the right, no matter what the value is. Okay, so here's an example of how to use them. This says, if the cosine of A is negative 2/3, find the sine of half A. So, the first thing you're going to do is recognize which identity to use. Now, you know I talked to you in class probably, and I told you about, well, look, you're going to be given those. You don't have to memorize them. I even forget the tangent one a lot of the time. But what you do have to do is remember that they exist. So if you spot something that says find the sine of half of an angle, then you have to remember that there are half angle formulas and how to use them. Okay, and then you can go and you can grab them. So I'm looking here at sine of 1/2 A. So the first step you want to do is pick the identity. There's 3 of them really, but this uses like tangent is that and that. Nah, don't worry about that. But it's basically these 3 right here. So I'm going to use the only one that says the sine of 1/2 A. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is recognize that they are half angle formulas. The second thing you're going to have to do is choose the right one. All right, I'm going to write that puppy down. The sine of 1/2 of the angle is going to be equal to plus or minus. On the top, we got 1 minus the cosine of A all over 2. Okay, so I wrote it down. Now I'm just going to substitute where I can. So, notice that they give me the cosine of A, and they also tell me that A is in between in quadrants 3 and 4. So this is the cosine is negative. In quadrant 4, it's going to be positive. So chances are this is going to be a quadrant 3 angle. And they give us cosine of A right there. So we can just substitute that right into here and simplify it. So let's go ahead and do that. So now instead of plus or minus the square root of 1 minus the cosine of A, we're going to do plus or minus 1 minus negative 2/3, which is going to simplify to 1 plus 2/3 over 2. Okay, you see that little substitution I just did? Now, you're actually done. The trigonometry is done. You've used the half angle formula. The only thing you have to do now is the algebra, and this is where kids get a little bit more lost. So what we just did was we substituted in, and now we have to simplify, and this is where kids have trouble. All right, so I'm going to kind of break it down to you piece by piece. You want to do it numerator first, then denominator, then the radical. So what I mean by that is the first thing you want to do is simplify the numerator. So I mean just that 1 plus 2/3. Use your calculator if you need to, but 1 plus 2/3. I know that's 3/3, and 2/3 is going to be 5/3. Okay, so now this numerator I do first, and that's going to give me positive or negative 5/3 over 2. Now we're going to do the denominator. So the first thing we did was the numerator. The second thing we're going to do is the denominator. So, I don't know if you recall this, but 5/3 divided by 2 is the same thing as 5/3 times 1/2. So that's basically 5/6. So this is the same thing as plus or minus the square root of 5/6. So we just took care of the denominator right there. Okay? Now we're just going to rationalize everything. So let's go ahead and rationalize it. Now, your rules of radicals are positive or negative. Now I'm going to split this up. This is the square root of 5 over the square root of 6. Now 6 isn't a perfect square. If it was, we'd be done. We just take the square root, but we do have to rationalize the denominator. So to get rid of that square root of 6, we're going to multiply top and bottom by square root of 6. And what that's going to give me is radical 5 times radical 6 is radical 30. So we're going to have positive or negative square root of 30. And radical 6 times radical 6 is just 6. Okay? So that's the answer, positive or negative radical 30 over 6. But it wants you to find the sine of the angle. Now, this is the sine of 1/2 of the angle, as we've kind of figured out over here. We just need to know which one to choose, either the positive or the negative. Well, we know it's in between 180 and 270, so the sign is going to be negative there. So we're going to take the negative option, negative rad 30 over 6, and you're done. All right? That's why they tell us A is in between 180 and 270. Cool? All right, now, let's go on and let's do another example of it. Then I'll let you try one. Now, the only other way you can really see these used is if you want to find the exact value of the cosine of 15 degrees. Now, that's the exact value. That means you can't just take your calculator and plug in 15 degrees and hit the cosine button and call it a day. It wants the exact value. You can use it to check it once you figure it out, but you can't just go ahead and do that. It wants the exact value. That means radicals, right? So what you have to do here is you got to figure out, first and foremost, you look at that 15 degrees and you say, look, I can't do 15 degrees on my unit circles. I can do 30, 45, 60, but I can't do 15, just like I can't do 75. But because you know the half angle formulas, you can say, is 15 degrees half of an angle that I can do? Okay, did you hear that question? I can't do 15 degrees, but is 15 degrees half of an angle I can do with the unit circle? And it is. 15 degrees is half of 30. So you make a little mental note that 15 degrees is equal to 1/2 of 30 degrees. So now instead of evaluating the cosine of 15 degrees, we can rewrite that as the cosine of 1/2 of 30 degrees. Those are the same thing, aren't they? 15.5 of 30. But now I can use this puppy right here with A being equal to 30 degrees. So the cosine of 15 degrees is the same thing as the cosine of 1/2 times 30. And we know that A is 30 degrees. Okay? So now we can just plug it on in. We're going to have plus or minus the square root of 1 plus the cosine of 30 degrees. All over 2. All I did was plug in 30 right there. See that? Now you can get out your unit circle and say, I need to know what the cosine of 30 is. And if you happen to remember that it's radical 3 over 2, tell me, because I'll be very, very happy. The cosine of 30 is radical 3 over 2. So we're going to have 1 plus the square root of 3 over 2, all divided by 2. Now remember, here the trig is done. You're finished. What you have to do now is simplify. So we're going to do our usual process, numerator, then denominator, then rationalize, and then choose which one we want. Okay? So let's go ahead and simplify the numerator. 1 plus the square root of 3 over 2. Well, that's the same thing as 2 divided by 2 plus the square root of 3 over 2. 2 over 2 is 1. So this is going to be 2 plus radical 3 over 2. Okay? So we're going to write that in, and that's going to be 2 plus the square root of 3 all over 2. And then we still have to divide it by 2. So we took care of our numerator. Okay, we added or subtracted the numerator. Now let's go ahead and take care of our denominator. So this was the numerator. Here comes the denominator. When you divide by 2, you're just going to stick that 2 in the denominator, basically. So this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3. Now we're going to divide 2 times 2 is 4. Okay? Now, we took care of our denominator. Now we just got to go ahead and rationalize. So let's rationalize over here. That's going to be plus or minus the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3 over the square root of 4. Now 4 is a perfect square. I don't have to rationalize life is good, but you do have to take the square root of 4. So our answer is going to be positive or negative 2 plus the square root of 3 over 2. Which one though? Well, cosine of 15 degrees. The cosine is positive. So we're going to take the positive value here. Okay? So our final answer is going to be positive 2 plus radical 3 over 2. All right? Now, pause it, rewind it if you need to, watch it again, but I'm going to give you one to try. Okay, take a second and do those two by yourself. Not a second. Take your time with them. Make sure you can get them, okay? And then I'll go through them with you real quick if you need me to. All right. You should have gotten, I don't know what you should have gotten. There you go. Square root of 5 over 5 and 2 square root of 2 minus rad 2 over 2. Those are your answers. If you got them, go on to the did you get it, and we'll call it a day. If not, let me do them real quick for you now. If you need a slower version, you got to rewind, right? So this is the cosine of x is 3 over 5. Find the sine of 1/2. So we know that the sine of 1/2 of x, which is the same as x over 2, right? X over 2 is equal to 1/2 of x. So the sine of 1/2 x is going to be equal to positive or negative the square root of 1 minus the cosine of x, which is 3/5 all over 2. It's not that bad if you can kind of leave out that first step. So that's going to be equal to plus or minus 5/5 minus 3/5 is 2/5 divided by 2. That's going to be equal to positive or negative 2/10. So the square root of 2/10. Now let's rationalize it. Positive or negative square root of 2 over the square root of 10. Multiply top and bottom by rad 10 because it ain't a perfect square. And what do we got? The square root of 20 over 10. Now the square root of 20 is 2 rad 5 over 10. The 2 over the 10 is rad 5 over 5. That's where we got that from. Okay? Sine of 22.5 is basically the same thing as 1/2 of 45 degrees. You can do the sine of 45 degrees. You can't do the sine of 22.5. So this is going to be equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 minus the cosine of 45 degrees. Rad 2 over 2. All over 2. That's going to be equal to 2 minus rad 2 over 2 right here, because it's going to be over 4. So that's where that answer came from. There's not a lot of room. I'm not going to squish it up and confuse you. It simplifies the same way we just did before. All right? Okay, kids, that ought to wrap it up for now. Let me go ahead and give you your did you get it? There it is. There's some answers. Make sure you get one of them at least, right? And that's about it. Have a great night, guys.